What was your branch of service?
Navy.
What was your highest rank?
On active duty or a highest rank in my total service?
We'll start with active duty and then we'll...
All right, active duty, my highest rank was Lieutenant JG.
Okay. And in the reserves?
Captain.
Captain, okay. What were some of the general locations you served?
Again, active duty was aboard ship in Norfolk, Virginia, which we served in the Atlantic. You know, I didn't put Atlantic down there, did I? Caribbean, or maybe I did. Caribbean, Mediterranean. That'll cover it.
Okay. What was the name of your ship while you were active?
Robert A. Owens.
And when you were in reserves, what were some of the locations you served?
Well, I started out at basically most of it was in Hartford. Reserve service is kind of a funny thing that you have a unit which you are a member of, which is in your hometown or near your hometown. But every year, for 2 weeks out of the year, you go to another command for further training or in some of my cases, I served on a promotion board, and that's not really my training, but it's selecting people for the future of the Navy. So, does that answer your question?
Yes.
Now, the home units were in Hartford, Connecticut, and New Haven, Connecticut. I was a group commander in New Haven. Well, it was one of my captain billets. I had a senior billet in the state of Connecticut.
Okay. Were you drafted or did you enlist?
Well, that's a question they had on the form. I was neither drafted nor enlisted. I enrolled in NROTC when I was at Yale, which is where I graduated.
Okay. What made you choose the Navy?
Okay, that's a good question. Several things. First off, I was always interested in aquatic sports and canoeing and sailing. Even when I was a kid, as a matter of fact, I taught sailing and canoeing at Boy Scout camp. I was a championship swimmer. And how did I get involved in swimming? Well, my father took me when I was young. By the way, my father went to Yale too. My father took me down to a swim meet, and I saw people swimming butterfly, and I'd never seen that before. I was just a kid. I was maybe 10. And so I decided that's what I was going to do, and I did that. But then from there, being involved in water and water sports and all that, I joined the Sea Scouts. I was only in that for a year because I went away to prep school. And when I was 11 years old, we're backtracking a few years now, when I was 11 years old, World War II started. Certainly I was involved on the home front with the Boy Scouts, and we did things like they don't do today, but we did then. We used to collect newspaper. We used to collect tin cans. Now we don't have very many tin cans anymore, but we had them then, and they recycled the tin that the cans were coated with. So I guess I would say I grew up with the war. You know, as I say, I was only 11 when it started. And why I chose Navy, that's another story, but the aquatic part, I guess, answered some of it. But another thing is that strange it may seem, I received a book as a prize for some outing or something, and it was the history of the Naval Academy. And it was very interesting, and I said to my dad, you know, I think I'd like to go to the Naval Academy. And my dad, as I said earlier, was a Yale graduate, and he says, you're going to Yale. There was no question about that. I said, he says, but if you want to go to Yale and be in the Navy too, then you can join the NROTC, which is exactly what I did. In those days, you had to pass an examination. It was a specific examination for NROTC. Today, they just take your college board grades. The program has changed considerably. So I entered in my freshman year at Yale, and one of my courses was NROTC. Things have changed a lot. I don't know how much time you have to talk about all this stuff, but if you stop me if I get too far afield. But the NROTC program had people who did not get scholarships, but they got their uniform and books in their junior and senior year. And then they had people who did get scholarships who got paid their tuition and room and board and uniform and everything that they were called regular students, and the 2-year people, which I was one of, were called contract students. We paid our own tuition, or my father paid my own tuition, although in those days, my goodness, when I think of what they're paying today and what my kids cost to go to school, it's unbelievable. I went the whole 4 years, and you guys can't go one term for that. Things have changed tremendously. Well, let's see, am I going too far afield with this? What was the beginning question here?
Well, you answered why you joined the Navy.
Yeah.
Do you recall the date that you signed up for ROTC?
Oh, yeah, that would have been, I went down to Yale actually before school started. So that would have been in late August or early September of 1948.
Okay.
And when we went down there, as I said, we had an exam just to get selected to go in. Then we had to pass a swim test. Since I was on the swimming team, that was no problem. And then we had to pass a test which Navy didn't require, but Yale did. A physical ability. You had to do so many push-ups, so many sit-ups, so many broad jumps, so many whatever, and which I also passed. So I was now a full-fledged student. In those days, as I said, my naval science was my elective in all 4 years. And I only had one elective in each year, in the first 3 years. But in the fourth year, I had 2 electives, or elective and a half, I think. Anyway, that was considered, the credits you got for that were considered toward your degree. Today, there's only like 2 or 3 courses, some history courses and stuff like that count toward your degree. And the students have to take this in addition to their regular curriculum. So it's a lot tougher for them today. I am not sure whether they even have the contract program anymore, because I'm not that familiar with the new program. Now, when I say the new program, at Yale, they did away with NROTC during the Vietnam War, all ROTCs. Navy had Air Force, Army, and Navy when I was in school, because obviously World War II had only ended 2 years before that, 2.5 years before that. So all 3 of them gone. And the word that went out to the public was, well, we're against the Vietnam War. It just wasn't a popular war, and we're not going to support it. In fact, there was another reason, which it's been bandied about, but it hasn't been made the top of the news, and that is that the professors at Yale, and by the way, this is hearsay. I didn't know, but nobody at Yale told me this. But the professors at Yale were jealous of the professor of military science. There were 3 of them, 1 for each service. These people were given the rank of full professor, and they were equal to any other full professor who had years of training and graduate degrees and all that stuff. Well, some of these Navy captains, they're all captains, some of them didn't have that kind of background. So the deal was that I heard anyway, apocryphal, if you will, is that these folks kind of lobbied against the military people, and that plus Vietnam, out they went. I wrote a little piece in one of my exhibits here.
We could
Yeah. But anyway, it was about the ROTC, and I bemoaned the fact that it wasn't there, and that I hoped it would return.
Okay.
And it did, but not till 4 years ago, 5 years ago. I'm not sure which.
So you were able to finish your 4 years at Yale before you fully went into the Navy?
Exactly. Now, when you're at Yale, it's like when I told you earlier about my reserve service. This was you were a member of the reserve. There was a draft going on there, And actually, I was called for the draft, but the professor of military science said, "Don't worry about it. Anybody gets called for the draft, bring it in here, and I'll write to them and tell them you're already in." And that was the end of it. I never heard from the draft board again. But the Korean War started in 1950. In 1950, I was finishing my sophomore year at school, and I went on a National Students Association trip to Europe. And a lot of people canceled from that because the Korean War was just starting in June, and that's when we got out of school. But I went anyway, and obviously it didn't involve Europe or the rest of the world. The following year, I went on my midshipman cruise, which was on a destroyer, and that's where I really, I think, found a niche. I really enjoyed what went on, how it went on, even though we were treated pretty much, not completely, but pretty much as enlisted men. We slept in their quarters, we ate in their mess, stuff like that. But I could see that the officers really had a hold of things, and they knew what was going on. And most of them appeared like they were enjoying themselves. Although I did serve with a bunch of World War II recalls, they were not happy. They served during World War II, and they stayed in the reserve, as I stayed in the reserve after the Korean War. You stay in reserve, you're subject to recall anytime the government wants you. Well, they got recalled, but they weren't happy campers. And they did 1 year, and they're out. I had 3 or 4 of my shipmates.
Okay. Can you tell me about some of your boot camp?
I didn't go to boot camp.
Well, your training for the Navy.
Well, our classroom training was our training.
Okay.
For the contract students, which I was, that's all I had was classroom trainings plus the midshipman cruise in 1951.
Okay.
For the scholarship guys, they went each summer. I only had to go 1 summer. They went 3 summers.
Okay.
And they had to serve, by the way, they had to serve 3 years. I only had to serve 2 because they got the money. Today it's more. I think today they got to serve 5. My son was in ROTC at Syracuse he graduated in 1980. He went in the Army for 5 years, but that's aside, so go ahead.
Do you remember any of your instructors?
By name?
Yeah.
My naval science instructors or any of my instructors?
Any of your naval instructors?
You got time for an anecdote? I don't remember any of their names, but I do remember what one of them said to me, which I live to regret. He was kind of a wise guy. He was a pilot, and he always had a funny line or joke or whatever. One of the things he says, you're teaching about naval customs, and he says, you can always tell when an officer wants to be saluted. He says, if you see them walking toward you and they got their head down and they're not paying any attention to what's going on, they don't want to be saluted. They don't want to be bothered. Okay, so now I'm on active duty. We'll jump ahead. And I'm walking we had a little officers club at the head of the piers at in Norfolk where the destroyers and submarines were. And I was walking back to my ship, and it was cold, it was rainy, the wind was blowing, and here comes the Commodore down the pier. Head down, not paying any attention. I walk right by him. And he gets about 2 steps behind me. He says, young sir, he says, don't you salute senior officers? And I said, yes, sir, Captain, I do. What's your name? Told him my name. What's your ship? Told him my ship. I never heard about it again. But that was the last time I took any advice from any of these guys. I don't remember his name, but that's the last time I took any advice. That's a long answer to a short question, but I don't remember any of their names, no.
Okay. So now, after you graduated, where did you go? What was the name of your ship?
USS Robert A. Owens, DDE 827. I got a picture upstairs, by the way, I can bring down if you want to copy that. I'd like to have that go into my record. It's in a big frame, though, and it's a very expensive frame. You can do that through the frame.
Or we could just take a photo of it.
Well, if you don't get glare from it, I'll bring it down. All right.
Okay. Now, what were some of your first impressions on the ship?
um, I guess my biggest impression was coming as a fresh caught ensign. I didn't know anything. I've had training, and I knew. I know I was taught a lot of stuff, but I didn't know anything. You get the difference. I was, but on the other, that's on the one hand. On the other hand, I was very willing to learn. Another anecdote. There were a bunch of junior officers on a destroyer, but destroyer altogether only has, depending on the ship, anywhere from 14 to 16 to 17 officers. Destroyers in those days were like half the size of the destroyers today. So anyway, you sit down and start joking around with your new friends and whatever when you first get there, and says, you're not really a member of this crew, of this wardroom, actually. That's what they call the officers, the wardroom. You're not a member of this wardroom until you've been kicked off the bridge. Well, I didn't know what he was talking about. Well, the very first time we got underway, my billet, my job for getting underway was the junior officer of the deck at sea detail, and sea detail is what is called the operation, the getting underway or to coming back in again. So I didn't have anything. Maybe I had something to do, but I wasn't told to do anything. I was just sort of observed, and while they were doubling up all the lines and everything, I was standing back on the wing of the bridge. And the captain came up to me, and he said to me, well, I don't want to use my first or last name. He said, you having fun? And I looked at him and said, Captain, I didn't know I was here to have fun. Get off my bridge. And so I joined the club. First time I went on watch. First time we went on underway watch. All right, let's go on to something else. What else were you talking about?
Okay. What was your first assignment?
Well, on a destroyer, you get as many assignments as they can throw on you that they think you can take. And the very first assignment was really funny. Usually this doesn't happen, but for some reason when I went aboard, the captain took me on a tour of the ship and showed me everything. And on the mess deck, there's this big metal locker, floor to ceiling. So he opens it up and he says, this is the ship's library. Opens it up and there's a bunch of books all thrown around, all in it. He closes it up and says, Davidson, you're the new library officer. So that's the first job I got. But jobs of consequence, the main job I had, I started in CIC, which is Combat Information Center. I was obviously the junior officer there, but by the time I left the ship, I was the CIC officer and actually had qualified as department head. The CIC comes under the operations department, which is a reason that I stayed in the Navy, frankly, is because of all the things that happen on a ship. To me, the only place I don't want to be is part of the operations. I don't want to be a fireman. I don't want to be an engineer. They're all down in either running this big fire or whatever. You can't see out. You don't know what's going on. It's a little smoother ride down there usually, but other than that, it's not fun to me because you don't know where the ship is going. You have no clue. All you have to know is keep those things going. And the other are the deck people, and they're out in the worst damn weather, topside, doing whatever they do. I didn't need any of that either. So I was very happy to be in the operations department, and that's why, I stayed because it was a wonderful place to be and a wonderful time in my life when I was just a kid and didn't know much of anything else. Although my dad had a printing company, but we'll get into that later. So I had some exposure to that, but not very much.
So on a day.
By the way, I got out of school on, I don't know, June, whatever. Within a month, I had orders to report. And there was no lag because there was a work on it. So. All right, go ahead.
So what would you do from a day-to-day in the operations?
It depends whether we're at sea or alongside. Alongside, basically, it was administrative work. And you asked me what billets I had. I had some of the, I was at one. Let's start again. In the operations departments, there are lots of different things that they do besides run CIC. And I was, for instance, I had the job that nobody wanted. I was a custodian of registered publications. This is not a fun job, and if you get in trouble on that job, you're in big trouble. Not just on your own ship, but in the Navy. This is a person who takes care of all the crypto key lists, all the operations orders, anything that's classified. The custodian has to know where it is and who's allowed to see it and who isn't, and make sure that they're inventoried once. I think it was once a month, maybe it was once a quarter. I don't remember. I mean, we're going back a long way now. And then you got a report letter at the end of it, and I was very proud of myself. I never got gigged for anything wrong. Now, other jobs I was. You asked me what jobs I had. As we go along, I mean, I didn't get them right as I started as an ensign, but as I, did more time, I was a trial counsel at a court martial, and you didn't have to be a lawyer or anything, and so I was, and I won every case I had, with exception of one when the officer who reported this enlisted man for malingering or whatever it was, he didn't write him up under the right statute, under the UCMJ, Uniform Code of Military Justice. So on a technicality, it got him off. But other than that, I was very proud of what I did there. I had a ball, everything I did. Oh, not to say that it was all fun and games, because it wasn't. But I just enjoyed it. By the way, several of my officer friends were married. And to me, they didn't look like they were having a very good time. My own roommate, the chief engineer, we were over in Italy, and he got a call from his wife saying, we're all through. And here he is, miles away. He couldn't do anything about it. It takes a particular kind of lady to be a Navy wife, or any military wife for that matter, but I only know from personal experience from the Navy. What other jobs did I do? There are a lot of meaningless jobs on the Navy. One of them for a while I was on the Supply Officers Cash Verification Board. What is that? Well, you're going overseas for months at a time. You got to pay people every 2 weeks. Well, you got to have the cash. So we took on one hell of a lot of cash when we went overseas. And somebody had to verify the fact that the supply officer wasn't putting it in his pocket or betting on the ponies or whatever. You really couldn't do it. It was an impossibility, physical impossibility. They have now these things in the bank. When you put some money in it, counts right up. Well, they didn't have anything like that. Money was banded in hundreds, and supposing someone pulled one out of the middle, you never would have known. So we used to count one, and then say, okay, that feels the same, and that was it. Well, if you have an honest supply officer, which they are most of the time. I mean, I don't know of any case where there weren't, but that's not to say there weren't any. So they have to do that, and they got another board that does something else. I don't know, with a supply officer, with postage and stuff like that. Also, I was in charge of the yeomen for a while. Yeomen are secretaries. And another job I had was I was a ship's navigator. This is all part of the operations department. So in order to train, when an officer comes aboard, you're always in training for something. And so my next step up was to become operations officer. And when I left, I was qualified as operations officer in 2 years, which is, I'm kind of proud of that, because it's kind of unheard of, number one. Number two, today they don't do that. And today they have to go to school to be a department head, to be an operations officer. They didn't have that then. It was on the job training.
So after you got out of active duty, you went into the reserves.
That in itself is another story. I got a lot of stories, but you guys said you're going to be here for 2 hours, so you can listen. when I left active duty, there's a checkout procedure, and one of them is you have to go to the hospital, and they have to make sure you're okay before they send you home. So then he goes over all my papers, and everything's fine. He says, "You got any problems?" I said, "Well, frankly, I have something that bothers me a little bit." He says, "What's that?" I said, "I got pain at the base of my spine." So he goes, "Oh, you got a polynidal cyst or sinus or something. I don't know." He says, "We can take care of that." I said, "Oh, no, you won't." Because I had heard of other people who had the same thing. And in those days, that operation was simple, but the recuperation took forever. You had to lie on your stomach for like 2 months and just get up when you had to get up. But otherwise, it was a tough recuperation. So he said to me, "Well, if we don't do it now before you go home, you won't be qualified for further reserve service." I said, "I'll take my chances." And I left. Well, I said, at the time, I didn't even say I'll take my chances. I think I said, well, at the time, I'm not interested. So I wasn't home a month, and I went down to the Reserve Center in Hartford, which is no longer there. Went before you were born, probably. I don't know. It's in Plainfield now. So I went down, and the experience I had, it was just what they were looking for. So they wanted me. So I said, "We got to send for your service record and your health record." Okay. So they sent for my service record and my health record. They got my service record, and I was taken aboard down there. My health record to this day has never come. So they didn't know that I had that problem. But as a follow-on, I don't know how many years later it was. Let's say it was 20. I got out in 54. It was somewhere around 70, 10, 15 years, give or take. This thing was bothering me again. So I went to a doctor here, and he had some new way of handling this thing where they didn't cut. They just cut a little hole and put something in, and they ate out all the bad stuff. And so I went in the hospital on Thursday. I was operated on Friday. I came home on Saturday, played golf on Sunday. This is what I like. So, yeah, I had it, but so what? And every time I see a corpsman, I thank him for my Navy career. Okay, where were we?
We were talking about your transition to the reserves.
Oh, okay. Well, okay, that's how I transitioned. And now when I came to reserve, I became first what was called a division officer. That's all in those records there. It's one thing, my first skipper I had told us you should always keep your own service jacket besides the one the Navy keeps. And I have mine there. I don't know whether I got everything in it. I know I got too much in it, but I kept everything that was there. So you start out as a division officer, and then I rose to, oh boy, again, that's probably in that file there, but I think the next thing I was administrative officer, and then I was executive officer, and then I became commanding officer of a surface division. Now, in the Hartford Training Center, Navy Reserve Training Center, there were surface divisions, and by the way, these are Navy and Marine Corps training centers, so there was the Marines there too, but I didn't have anything to do with them. I didn't have no clue what they did, except that they drilled it there. So we had surface divisions, and we had a CB division, and at one time we even had a Coast Guard division. Again, the Navy had nothing to do with them. So, and we also had a security group, which was the guys, the code people. So I went through the ranks, so to speak, and I became skipper of the Navy Reserve Surface Division 3-6 in Hartford, and that's a 2-year billet. And after that, I went on the group staff, which there are a number. As I said, there in Hartford, there were 2 service divisions, but there were other units as well, and they all came under the umbrella of the staff. And I was with them. Oh, yeah, I was them for a while. But in between, the security group skipper, his tour was up, and they didn't figure they had anybody qualified to be the skipper of the security group. So I said, well, I'll do it. I mean, I'm getting through with one job now, so I'll do it. And I had a security clearance, so that wasn't a problem. So I became skipper of the security group for less than a year. Then I went to the group staff, which they used to have two statuses, pay and non-pay. So I was on pay status all the way up through the time that I finished my security group. Then I went group staff and I was non-pay. Then they, and I can't tell you the years and everything, but it's all in the folder. I keep pointing to that, and on the movie you probably shouldn't do that. But the group command, I'm a little fuzzy on that. Anyway, I was promoted to commander. My history is a little. I'm trying to go through the evolution. My history is a little fuzzy on that. I did write something on that, as a matter of fact, but I don't have it here, and that would have detailed it a little more. But long story short, I became captain, and the group command in New Haven opened up, and that was the only time that I did reserve duty. My regular station attachment was not in Hartford; it was in New Haven, and that was a senior billet in Connecticut. They had several divisions. They were about twice as big as Hartford, and so that. I can't give you the year numbers, but that was my last pay bill that I had. And I stayed on for a while, but now I begin to burn out. And the reason I burned out was twofold. Number one, I'm a destroyer sailor. Well, destroyer sailors are, they're commanders. The skipper, captain, commander. Well, if you're a commander, oh, by the way, let's back up. I'm not sure when it was. Forget it. I'm a little confused as to which went first, the chicken or the egg. But anyway, because I was promoted to commander, I could no longer go to sea on a destroyer. I didn't want to go to sea on anything else. Actually, I had one other tour on a tender, destroyer tender, but we didn't. Yeah, I guess we went somewhere, but I think we were only out for 2 or 3 days, and I think I spent the time playing bridge with the captain, but it's not very beneficial on my part, or the Navy's for that matter. But the second part of it was because I couldn't go to sea because I was too senior, and I wasn't getting paid either. I said, I'm not having any fun, and I'm not getting paid for not having any fun. If you paid me, maybe a little bit more fun. I did have a bunch of billets after that. I was a Navy representative to the Adjutant General of the state of Connecticut, and then I got another command, the Volunteer Training Unit in Hartford. This was a VTU, but it was NROS, which means Naval Reserve Officer School. There were a lot of officers who were just taking education and getting points so that they could stay in long enough to retire. And I was a skipper of that. That was the last bill that I had before I retired. But I wasn't getting paid for that either. And neither was I to be that was another story. I got orders. I got pay orders to the state, and I was very happy. And then when my orders came, they said they're non-pay. But I served for a year, and then they asked me to come back to be the skipper of the VTU. So I actually had 4 commands in the Navy Reserve.
So now when you were in the reserve, you would only have to go in a couple of weeks a year?
I had to go every Thursday night.
Every Thursday?
And then 2 weeks a year.
Okay.
Now, some of the billets were a little longer some of the training was a little longer than I sat selection board for lieutenant commander. The Navy's promotion system was run by the Bureau of Personnel, and they were then in Washington. Now they're in Tennessee. Don't ask me why. There's no motion there, but that's another story. So that took more than 2 weeks. It took I think 3 weeks. I don't know. Didn't make any difference. As I said, I have a family business, and so I just left a little longer, that's all.
Okay. Were you awarded any medals or citations?
If you mean hero medals, no. But if you mean service medals, yes. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, sir.
Okay. Well, let's start with citation first. I became a surface warfare officer. That's the one I'm most proud of. That I guess would you call a citation. It's not a medal, although you get to wear this. Then I had the European Occupation Medal. I put that on one of those forms that you're just reinventing the wheel here. The European Occupation Medal. And then the next thing I had was we used to call it the Gedunk ribbon, the American Defense Service Medal. In the Navy, the Gedunk, it was the truck that came to the head of the pier when the ship came in, and when he got there, if you wanted to go out and buy a sandwich or something, if you could get off the ship, or if you weren't essential, they used to say you got a medal for going to the Gedunk. But it was American Defense Service Medal, and then I had the Reserve Medal, and then I got an hourglass and a Reserve Medal, which meant you got a Reserve Medal for 10 years, and I was in over 20, so each 10 years you get an hourglass. And the rest of the stuff I got a couple more from the state of Connecticut, but that's really not federal, and we're not talking state. So,
Okay.
oh yeah, state. One of the state medals I got, I guess we should talk about, is State Naval Militia, which was a paper organization. It never did anything as far as I could see, but there was a commander who was on the governor's staff before I was. And then they had nobody representing the Naval Militia. First it was moribund, and then I think it was dead. But I have some. Did I bring those? I didn't bring them down. I have some big certificates that they made that made me an officer in the Naval Militia.
Now, how did you stay in touch with your family while you were in?
Okay, while I was in active duty?
Yes.
Well, I was a good boy. I wrote, but I wrote for a reason. I only wrote when I was overseas. And I said to my mother, keep it as a diary. So I wrote in a lot of stuff that I did. And somewhere, it's around this house somewhere, my mother died. I got them, but I don't know where they are. But when I was in Norfolk, it was close enough so that, I could come home on leave, or sometimes if I really pushed it, I got a long weekend, I could come home for a long weekend. So I really wasn't out of communication.
Okay. How was the Navy food?
Well, if officers don't eat well, it's the officer's fault. On board ship, the wardroom, the officers eat in a separate place. They have, I'll tell you a story about that in a second. They have their own room. In fact, there's a picture of it over here. It's not a very good one. And one of their number, usually a junior officer, is elected to be mess treasurer. Officers pay for their own food and their own housing. In those days, I believe that we paid $27.88 a month or something like that, some pittance for our food. But there was a chief steward's mate who kind of honchoed the menu, but the mess treasurer made sure that stuff he liked and his friends liked was all on the menus. And we bought stuff that the crew didn't have, maybe some salad dressing or something like that. Or if we went to another port, we'd go over and dicker for some prawns, or langustas, we call them, little lobster type of things. So, as I say, the food was great. I got no complaints.
You said there was a story attached to that you wanted to.
Oh,
tell us.
I told you I was mess treasurer for a while. Well, our main reason in being, our ship was on the ways at the end of World War II, and it sat there for a couple of years, and then they decided to put on an integrated fire control system. Basically, we then became an anti-submarine warfare ship, and they changed our main battery from a 5-inch, which all the destroyers had, to a 3-inch. and that was for anti-aircraft. So we were not really shore fire support in any way, shape, or form. So we didn't. Let's back again. During the Korean War, all the destroyers on the Pacific coast and the Atlantic coast took turns going on round-the-world cruises, and they went to Korea, and they were on the firing line for a month, and then continued back around through the Indian Ocean and up through the Red Sea. And I would have given my eye teeth to do that. There are only two ships in the Navy that couldn't do it, two destroyers. One was us, and one was our sister ship, which was on the West Coast. They went over first. They were useless because the guns on the beach could reach them before they could reach the beach. So when it came our turn to go, we went the other way, and we occupied Europe, which is one of those things, one of those medals that I said I had. Okay, so now I went a little. What was the question?
You said you had a story attached to the food, or when I asked the question about the food.
Oh, well, our main thing we did was search submarines. We went out every way. We worked with air. That's another job I had, by the way, air controller. I told airplanes what to do, just like the towers do at the airport. I had a pilot's license that I got in college, and that probably made it a little easier for me when I went to air control school. I went with another fellow who didn't pass. So after one particular frustrating day, we could never find the damn submarines. First thing is, sonar won't ping at over 15 knots. You get sea return. And second thing is they could just cruise right along, and there's a thermal layer that they get under. You can't get them. So we just finished a particularly frustrating exercise, and the word comes down now. Lieutenant Davidson, report to the captain on the bridge. So I figured I'm going to get my ass, excuse me, this is going to be on tape. I figured I'm going to get reamed for a lousy exercise because we never got the submarine that day. I go up to the bridge. He doesn't even acknowledge my presence other than look at me and says, "We had stewed tomatoes and bread for lunch today." I said, "Yes, sir, Captain, I like that." He says, "Well, I don't." And so when I went up, expecting to get reamed for not finding the submarine, I got, because of my mess treasure duties. So we didn't have that anymore.
Okay. Did you ever feel any pressure?
All the time.
And how would you handle that?
Well, basically, you learn from your mistakes, number one. Number two, as an officer, you don't, like when I was a CSC officer, which was mainly my main job at the time I was in, you have people working for you who actually push the buttons. And you get with them and say, "Look, we got gigged for doing this, or this went wrong, and now we got to fix it." So they're really, as far as pressure goes, the whole thing is if you're not under pressure, then you're not trained properly. And a lot of things happen that, like instantaneous things. Like I wasn't on a bridge one night, but we had an aircraft carrier that decided he was going to turn right when he should have turned left. Damn near ran us over. My fellow behind me, who unfortunately now dead, he was on a bridge. And he says it came pretty damn close. He says they came within 200 or 300 yards. Well, when you're a little bitty destroyer and one of these big guys comes down on you, it's scary. Yeah. But that's an instantaneous thing. You get the pressure, then it's gone. Other times you can get bored. I used to stand on a midwatch and get bored silly when we're steaming independently. And in the officer to deck, so you got one course, and unless there's anything happening, nobody comes. I mean, there's people on the bridge, but the captain or any senior people are, call me if there's any problem. Well, I got bored doing this, so let's see if I can describe it. The pilot house is where the controls are, where the wheel is, and the engine order telegraph. On the after wall of the pilot house, there's a toggle switch. And the Navy on board ships, as much as possible, and I think that's about 99% of things, are redundant. So on a destroyer, you have what's called after steering. And obviously the pilot house where the wheel is in bow. It's not in the bow, but it's way up forward. Well, after steering is way back aft. And there's a person on watch back there. And his job is, if the steering goes down on the bridge, then they take over back aft. And they're given verbal commands over a sound power telephone as to what to steer. Well, I just got so bored, I'd go over and I'd put my back up against the bulkhead, reach behind me, and switch that toggle switch to neutral. And see how long it took the helmsman to realize that he didn't have steering control. And then we'd go through the exercise of switching back aft and then switching it back forward and whatever. It's just something to do. So there wasn't always, but that's on the one hand. On the other hand, that was, midwatch is 12 to 4 in the morning. So there's not very much going on anyway.
Did you ever go on leave anywhere?
On leave?
Yeah.
Yeah, I usually came home. But if you're talking on shore duty, yeah, I mean ashore. I went in shore in every country in the Mediterranean, and probably 2/3 of them in the Caribbean. Yeah, every time we went somewhere, got a story for that too. Every time we went somewhere, we had to convert our money to the currency of that country. And at the end, you never came out even. You always had stuff left over in your pocket. So the last place we were was in Tangier, in Morocco. Tangier is a free port, which means you can use any kind of money, and they'll convert it to their money. And there's a big chart up there that says how much each country's money is worth. So we were coming home. We were there for 3 or 4 days, I don't know. And this goes along with the boring mid-watch. And when I got through with watch, back up. I liked anchovies. Everybody thought I was nuts, but I loved anchovies. So instead of taking all that money in Tangier and turning it into dollars, I turned it into anchovies. And then when I got off the mid-watch, or if I had the 8 to 12 at midnight, usually, that watch, I'd sit in the wardroom and have anchovies and crackers. And they all thought I was crackers. But yeah, we were like in Cartagena, Spain. We were there for about a week, and we were the first U.S. ship that had been in there since World War II. Well, it wasn't that much after World War II, 5 years. And you name the country, we were there. The only place that we couldn't get ashore was Turkey. Now Turkey is very much in the news. We were at a place called Iskenderun, which is in the south shore of Turkey, and they didn't allow us on the beach for whatever reason. And I'm kind of glad, because when you're at sea, there usually is no problem with insects, but we had flies coming out from the beach, and they were bothering the hell out of us. And I said, my God, what if they're way out here? Can you imagine what it would have been in Iskenderun? I'm glad we didn't go ashore. So even though we were at Turkey, we really didn't go ashore there. But we were in Greece for a week and went to all the touristy things, And I was in Lebanon for a week. Lebanon, what a shame that's happened in that country. It was such a beautiful country. And it was where all the elite people went for vacations or whatever. As a matter of fact, they were having the European water skiing championships there when we were there. And that would have been in 1953, I guess. And today, I've only seen pictures. I don't want to go there. It's horrible what's happened over there.
Right. So in your downtime, besides playing with the controls sometimes, what would you do for entertainment?
Sleep. I mean, they worked us pretty hard. You don't have an 8-hour day. You're either on watch or you're working at your own department's administrative work or training. So I used to say, if anyone wants me, I'll be in my office, and I used to go flake out whenever I could. So there was plenty to do. On a small ship, there is another anecdote. I was at the officers club in Norfolk one day, and we had in our class in our NROTC. I had a picture of it, but I donated it to Yale, so I don't have it anymore. But there were, I'm going to give you a figure, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but I don't think, there were at least 80 or 90 of us who, some went in the Marines, about 6 or 8 of them went in the Marines, but the rest of us in the Navy. And I go into the officer club, and one of my classmates was walking out. Hi, Mike, how are you? Hey, Harry. So I said, what ship you on? And he says, I'm on, it was one of the carriers. I don't remember which one. And he says, I got a big stateroom, and I got a big office, and I got a enlisted man that I command that takes care of everything. And I said, Jesus, that sounds really great. He says, yeah, but I haven't got anything to do. In my case, I always had plenty to do. Always had plenty to do. Training never stops on a destroyer. Well, training never stops on big ships either, except they have so many people that they spread it around so thin that, I don't think I would have liked it if I hadn't been on destroyers. When we graduated, the Navy has what was called then, they probably still have it now, called a dream sheet. You wrote down where you wanted to go. So I put destroyers Atlantic, and I got destroyers Atlantic. Most of my classmates wanted to go on destroyers. They didn't. They went on APDs or some kind of amphibious type ships. So I was just lucky all the way around, and I look back on that with fond memories, really.
What did you think of the officers and your fellow servicemen?
You better be more specific. What do you mean? What did I think of them?
Did you think that they were good, hardworking servicemen? What was your opinion of them?
Oh, I got you. Okay. Well, first place, 5 of the officers, during the time I was on the ship, 5 officers were Ivy League. And so they were all pretty good people. I liked them, not because they were Ivy League, but because they were educated, and they were in all NROTC. Some of them were OCS, and some of them, there was another direct commission program. I have a picture of me awarding one here to somebody in Hartford. But basically, with the exception of one who I thought was completely inept. As a matter of fact, he was at jail on my watch once, and I gave him the con, and I put a life jacket on. we didn't wear life jackets unless we were on some kind of drills or whatever. And he thought that was funny, but he and I had another guy. Yeah, we had some. He was inept. I had another guy who was, I don't know what you call him, but he was a misfit. Let's call it that way. The rest of them, I got along with fine, and they got along with me fine, and they all were there for different reasons. None of them, to my knowledge, stayed in the Navy. Well, I take it back. There were some regular Navy guys that I served with, and one of them became CNO. I don't know if you know what that is, but that's the Chief of Naval Operations. And also a fast friend of mine. I was an usher at his wedding. His wife just died, unfortunately, last January. But I had another one who was an Academy graduate, and his claim to fame, he was on the Academy golf team. He left the ship before I did and got command of some little minesweeper or something. And he became admiral. So we had 2 admirals, which was quite unusual, but they were both regular Navy, Naval Academy. Everybody was there because they had orders to be there, and they willingly accepted them, and for the most part did their job. I had one guy who supported me who I thought could have done a better job, but I wasn't his boss, but he was the electronics officer, and when some of my equipment went down, his people were supposed to fix it, and sometimes they didn't, or didn't do it right, or didn't respond enough to make me happy.
Right. Where were you when your service ended? Can you tell me about that day?
That day?
Yeah, if you remember what was going on in your mind.
Well, I was disappointed to leave, that's for sure. Actually, my detachment order said on or about, which meant I didn't have to go leave on a certain day. And I said to the captain, we were scheduled to go down to the Caribbean for an exercise for a week. I said, Captain, do you mind if I stay on for the week because it says on or about in my orders? I'd like to go. He said, sure. You know, we were good friends. So,
so what was your homecoming like?
nothing special. Yeah, because as I say, I had a chance to get home often.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the days and weeks following, what did you do? Did you go right back to work?
Yeah, I think so. As I said, we had a family business, and so I guess that's what I did. I don't remember exact what happened day by day, but basically, I guess that's what I did. My father said to me, look, he said, you do whatever you're required to do. He said, but whenever you need, there's a desk here for you. He didn't say I had to come to work for him, but it was sort of a given. As a matter of fact, when I was on active duty, I wrote to Harvard Business School and I asked for an application. And I sat down and we had a little desk in our stateroom and I started to read it and fill it out. And I took it and I threw it in the round file. I said, you know, you're single, you're making a living, you have no family. Why in the world do you want to go back to school? And I knew I had a job to go to. So I never went to graduate school. Now, a bunch of my friends did. They served their time, and then they went to grad school. But I don't. Of the whole graduating class from NROTC, to my knowledge, there was only one other person besides myself, and he became a rear admiral. But he wasn't a line. Well, I guess he is a line officer, but he was a what do you call it, a PR type of guy, and he lives in New York City, and he got very much involved with the Fleet Week and everything that they have down there every year or two. I don't know. So he's still very active in the Navy League and things like that down there. But just the two of us, that was it, out of that whole crew that stayed. Now, some stayed. I have one in particular who was going to stay, and he was a skipper of I think a DE, and they had a collision, and that was the end of his career. Doesn't matter whose fault it is. You get involved in a collision, you're done.
Yeah. So what was your family's business?
Printing.
Printing?
We're commercial printers.
Okay. Did you make any close friendships while in the Navy that you kept?
Yeah, my immediate assistant, unfortunately, my immediate assistant and my immediate predecessor, are both dead now, but they became very good friends. The only one that I'm still friendly with, as I mentioned earlier, that one of them became CNO, is Carl Trost, and we're good friends, but he lives in Annapolis, so I don't see him very often. I did see him. There's a little plaque here. When I at the Navy Memorial, I bought a plaque, and he was like the honored officer at the ceremony, or whatever. I think the date's on there. I think it's 2003 is the last time I saw him. And as I said, I just found out last week that his wife had died, which is shocking. Because I stayed at his house. I went down there for that thing, and I stayed with him for 2 days.
How did your military experience influence your thinking about war or military in general?
You haven't got enough time. I don't know where to begin. How did you phrase that again? You say, how did it change my thinking, or how did it affect my thinking?
Influence your thinking.
Influence my thinking. Well, I think that the military has gotten the short end of the stick, budget-wise. And everybody thinks that, not everybody, but the general thought is today that we don't need this and we don't need that because the next war isn't going to be the kind of war we had before. And they're right on that. They're right that the next war isn't going to be like the last war. However, they are not right when they say we don't need it. Every time something happens in the world, who steps in? Us. And who do they look to for help? Us. So where in the world do they think that they're going to get armed forces that are strong enough and have enough resources in order to do whatever needs to be done? And that's another thing. We have, I'm talking Navy now, we have a 2-ocean Navy. We have to, because we're in the middle of 2 oceans and the rest of the world is either off the Atlantic coast or off the Pacific coast. So we have to have like duplication. Now, it's not to say that you can't get from one to the other. You certainly can by plane. But as far as ships go, you got to have duplication. When people say, well, ships are antique. Well, ships aren't antique. Yeah, they have ICBMs and all this kind of stuff. But the fact is that if it comes to that, there ain't going to be any more world. And I don't, as dumb as some of the people in this world are, I don't think they're stupid enough to start a nuclear war. Because if they do, we're all going. No matter what they're fighting about or for, or what they want to create, they got to be smart enough to know that they don't use nuclear weapons. Which means we still have to fight conventionally, and we need support from the government, and we're not getting it. No, I don't say we're not getting. We're not getting enough, and I don't know. That's a short answer to your question. I know you're only here for 2 hours, and 2 hours are almost up. So you go ahead.
Did you join any veterans organizations?
Yeah, I'm a member of American Legion, and I'm a member of the Jewish War Veterans.
Are you still active?
I pay my dues. Does that make it active? Well, I march in the parade, so I guess that makes me active.
Do you attend Navy reunions?
Yeah. I haven't of late, but we started I think one of the things I put here was the last issue of our newsletter. We started an Owens ship's reunion. Every other September, in the odd years, we meet in various places in the country. And unfortunately, the last 2 or 3 I've missed. And I'm very sorry about that because I was in them from the beginning, although I'm probably one of the older people there. So a lot of my friends are either gone or they're not able to travel or whatever. But yeah, I do go. And the next one, I know it's going to be close. It's going to be in one of the suburbs of Philadelphia. So we've even had one, by the way, we even had one in Groton, Connecticut several years ago. So yeah, I'm very much involved in that as a participant, not as a wheeler and dealer.
Right. How did your service affect your life?
Wow. I think one of the things that taught me is rational thinking. There's a goal for everything, and there is a way to achieve that goal, which perhaps I wouldn't have gotten had I not gone in the military. And that really, it's awfully vague. The answer is awfully vague, but you get what I'm trying to say. There's a military way to doing a lot of things, and for the most part, it's pretty damn good. The only thing that I don't like about the military way, which really not the answer to this question, it's more like the last question, is that the military gets tied up in its own paperwork when they want to purchase anything. And it takes forever and a day to write the specs, to put out the bids, and then the specs are so nebulous that they're paying for stuff that they don't need. The deal about the $75 hammer and all that kind of stuff that you used to read in the newspaper. It's crazy. It's crazy. And I've heard some people try to ameliorate that and say, oh, no, there's a reason for this and a reason for this and a reason for this. Well, I don't think the guy in the front shooting the gun or on a ship that's doing whatever he's doing gives a damn about that. All he wants to do is have the equipment and have it be operable. Now, sure, there's a lot of things you got to write in. I know that. Even my own business, bid on everything, right? But you got to have specs that make sense. So when you want to get to here, you go by this way, not by this way. And that's one of the things. Organized thinking, I guess, is the short answer to your question.
Okay. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you would like to add?
No, only one thing that because of my Navy Reserve service and the fact that I've stayed in all this time, West Hartford is not a large town, and most of the veterans community, the older veterans community, know who I am, and I'm sort of the Navy rep, if you will. And I have over here a picture of me being the Grand Marshal of the Memorial Day Parade a few years back, and I was a speaker and all that. And I feel that the military community is close-knit, but not strangler close. But, you know, I have lunch every Tuesday with some old friends, and one of them is a career Navy guy. He wasn't a reservist. And I was senior to him, but he was in a lot longer than me. And he had commands and whatever. They're all the people who are veterans today, who act as veterans, either in veterans organizations or whatever, all seem to be pretty damn good people. And we all get along fine. And all you got to do is say, I was Navy or I was Army or whatever, and all of a sudden we got stories to tell. And she's wagging her head, she was in the Army. That's how it is. And I think it's a beautiful thing. And frankly, I feel that people who, I can't speak for daughters. I had daughters, but I had none of them that were in the service. But I have a son who was in the Army. He was ROTC at Syracuse. He was in for 5 years. And he was a Green Beret and all that hotshot stuff. And then I had a grandson who unfortunately had a physical problem, but he was in the Navy as a nuke. My point is that, at least for males, which is where I come from, and I'm sorry if I just can't speak for women. I think that it's the only way to go. And if I'm hurting your feelings, I'm sorry. But I think that the military, especially today, with all the stuff that's going on in our society that's so nuts, that we need people to respect authority, and B, to conform to whatever, and this is part of respecting authority, whatever laws of the land are. You ought to write this speech. You're going like this. But the fact is, I recommend that for every able-bodied boy. And now, one other thing, and this is a little gripe I have, and I can say this because she has been in the Army. When a boy turns 18, he's got to go down to the post office and sign up for the draft. Women today want to serve in every branch of the Army or the Navy or whatever, but they're not required to go down to the post office when they're 18 and sign up for the draft. Why not? Why not? Put that in your film.
Well, I would like to thank you for your service to our country and for your time today.
Thank you.